Hi everyone, welcome back to Java 1 for All. In this video we are going to keep talking about the final modifier, and now we are going to see how it behaves when we are working with reference variables. So you know that with primitive types you need to initialize, and that's not very different from the way it's going to behave with reference types. The difference is that what cannot change is the reference of the object. So before we start, let's create a new class here, and that will be a class that we are going to change and add as a reference to car. So has one buyer, and create the name, and let's create getters and setters for this name. So in my car, I can say that my car can only have one buyer. So it doesn't make a lot of sense because there are specific cases where the final can be used as a reference, especially for following a pattern called singleton. We are going to talk about that later. But for now, it's important for you to understand the concept. So here I'm going to create a public, but I'm not going to create it as static. It will be only final, and the name will be buyer. Make sure that you are going to import buyer. Buyer's first class. Sometimes it just stops working in a ring. And of course, if you don't initialize, you are going to get the same error. You need to have this variable initialized. And we'll create here new buyer. So just as an example, you have two objects. One object is the car object. So basically this is the car object. And inside the car object, you have a reference, has a buyer. So this reference to buyer is final. So that means that you need to initialize, and you are initializing by creating another object, and this object is a buyer with only one attribute, that is name. So this buyer, let me just properly write it here. So this buyer has a reference. So when we assign a buyer new buyer, it means that here we got something. So let's say we have this reference. Doesn't matter for us. I'm saying by adding final to buyer that this reference cannot change. So even though I can create another object, I will never be able to do something like this, because once the reference is assigned to a final reference variable, it cannot be changed. But the attributes, the data inside the object that this buyer is making a reference to, can be changed. So let's see that in action. Let's come back to your code. And now here at the modifier, we are not going to create any getters and setters because it's public, but at our test, we are going to do the following. So car dot buyer, and if you try to add another buyer, you are going to get an exception saying, hey, this guy is a final, you cannot assign a new value to buyer. But you can still use it. So if I call car dot buyer, you will see that we have a reference. Sorry, Control Shift F10. We have a reference to buyer, and here, if I want, I can set car dot buyer dot set name curly ring, and now I can call again car dot buyer. So if you want, remember, we can override actually the getters and setters. So just go to the buyer class. We can override the toString. So just out insert toString and then select name. Now if you execute again, you will see null for name because we didn't have anything at the time we were calling this buyer. And then suddenly we have here a new name, and then we are printing again. So what you have to remember for this video is that when you are adding final modifier to a reference variable, what cannot change is the reference. So if you want to get ahead, just take a look at the singleton pattern. And basically it says that is a pattern in software design that makes you create only and allows you to create only one single instance of a class. So there are specific cases, especially, for example, using connections to databases. You have several connections, but the class that should take care of that connection usually is just one. But don't worry about that because we have way more content until we get there. So for now, let's stop at this, and in the next one, we are going to talk about the final modifier when we add them to classes and methods. So I see you in the next video. Bye.